folks. Welcome back to Indaba. This is Chris once again. Good morning, folks, and welcome back once again to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Chris live in central Pennsylvania. At normally the hour I seem to reserve for covering Brockenfell, Senecal, the Bikers Rally, and things like that in South Africa. It's a bit early here in the morning, but my special guest today is none other than the leader of the Democratic Alliance in KwaZulu-Natal. That's Francois Rodgers. Francois, how are you doing this morning? No, that's fine. That'll help me out because while I understand Afrikaans and I can read it, ek praat nie Afrikaans nie, eh? Yeah. Although I use that line and usually like, yeah, you do. You just spoke it. What are you talking about? Anyway, so but it's very confusing. A name like Francois and then Rodgers. So it obviously the evolution in your family history there, it kind of confuses people. You think that might be an Anglophone name looking at Rodgers.
History, but I also speak one of the local languages, which is isiXhosa, which helps me a lot, one of the local dialects, but I think we'll avoid isiXhosa. But if there are any isiXhosa viewers, uthi molweni namhlanje uhamba kanjani?
Well, there you go. Folks, my apologies. We had a slight problem there with the audio for a moment, and you didn't hear Francois for the first when he responded to me in Afrikaans, but you got to hear him speaking Xhosa, so there you go. So then we made up for that. Anyway, they can hear you now. I fixed that. My apologies, folks. So let's get right to it. You're the leader of the Democratic Alliance, an opposition party there in KwaZulu-Natal, and the main opposition party nationally in South Africa, and of course the party that runs the Western Cape. But in KwaZulu-Natal, we just had these municipal elections, and we had some interesting things happen, but there have been two major events that we should take and mention here very quickly, and we're going to talk about the floods here. But we had this event last year, which I've termed the internal ANC insurrection inside their party, which led to mass rioting across your province in particular, but also in parts of Gauteng. And the province is still recovering from that. The damage to the port, the damage to infrastructure, the damage to business confidence, foreign direct investment, all of those things. You're still trying to recover from that. And on the heels of that, some meteorologists reported that there was a massive storm coming. And of course, this wasn't a unique event. I mean, this is probably, I don't want to say it's biblical, but it was definitely a big one. But we've seen several large cyclones and tropical storms come across this region and devastate Madagascar and Malawi, Mozambique, just north of there over the past 6 or 7 weeks. This one hit KwaZulu-Natal especially hard. You saw places with 311 millimeters of rain in 24 hours. That's an unheard of amount of rain. It's about a third of annual rainfall for parts of the province. And this stuff hit Sunday night, if I recall. I mean, that's when it became clear flooding was already beginning. And the response I saw from the municipal authorities, say in places like eThekwini, Durban, and Pietermaritzburg and other places was not very much from the outside. Of course, I'm not on the ground. That's why we're here to talk to you. But what I saw was officials not out. I didn't see search and rescue teams. I didn't see the military deployed. I didn't see the police service out there. I really didn't see much anything. And then I warned people already by Wednesday of that week, just a couple days later, but because of the massive destruction to the water and sanitation system we saw and the reservoirs that were damaged and all just the floodwaters, which will upset the water table, polluting it, that we're very likely to see things like dysentery, maybe even cholera outbreaks because people aren't getting potable water. There's no ablution units being delivered to people. You have thousands of people homeless. Anyway, I can go on for hours about this, but you're the leader of the DA. You're not in power there, but your party has been active and out doing things. You in particular, Mr. Rodgers, I've seen several videos of people recording you being out and pointing out the hazards and dangers and what needs to be done. Can you tell us a little bit about the response, but maybe let's start with what's the current state of things. We could go through a whole list of things, at least $2.5 billion by the government's own estimations for schools, clinics, railroads, water and sanitation. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You've got homes, you've got businesses, you've got so many other things. So can you give us kind of an update where we're at right now in KwaZulu-Natal vis-a-vis what the situation is, the recovery, the rescue? I take it there's still some cadaver teams out there looking for people who've passed away.
Chris, let me maybe start off by saying that yesterday the Premier made a statement and they put the estimated damage at 960 billion, which is just short of 1 trillion rand. And then a couple of hours later, they put out an apology to say they got it all wrong. It's only 17 billion rand. So perhaps that gives you an indication of what sort of capable state we've got that's dealing with the disaster. But on the ground, I can tell you I've been on the ground since the storm hit, and I've based myself mainly in eThekwini. Tomorrow I'm going slightly more north to engage with families who've lost loved ones. There's some sort of normality returning. Some of the areas, affected areas, are starting to get water and electricity back, but we're still sitting literally with thousands and thousands of people who don't have access to water, and you've literally got 100 water trucks trying to serve 15,000 people in eThekwini. Some of the damage reports we're getting is going to take up to 6 months to repair. So quite how they're going to roll out potable water, as you said, in those areas is of grave concern. Also being on the ground, Chris, I must say that I'm born and bred in this particular province. So I've been here for 60 odd years. I have never, ever seen the type of devastation and death in our province that I've witnessed over the last 2 weeks. And of course, the saddest part of all, because of the enormous water that flowed through certain areas, particularly informal communities, some of those people still are searching for their loved ones. You're right, we've still got search and rescue on the ground, but there's an absolute a lack of coordination between search and rescue, between the province, between eThekwini. And at the moment, we're sitting with just over 7,000 people who are finding themselves homeless, and 6,000 people who are being housed in shelters. So the crisis is far from over, but it seems to be steadily normalizing itself.
Well, it's for those who may have known South Africa from years ago, and we're talking about a different era. And this isn't throwing shade on the African National Congress or the new dispensation since 1994 or any of this, things in the old. No, but the reality is that at a certain point, South Africa had reliable, developed first world services, search and rescue, responses, things like that. Now, look, we could talk about the governance here in America, and I've got a lot of things to complain about right now. But I can tell you right now that if we had a flood here tomorrow in the state of Pennsylvania, I can draw on the Pennsylvania National Guard, which has thousands of guards, and they have water buffaloes, the containers, the Bowsers that carry water all over the state. These units could respond with that, with tents, with rations, with potable water, with the things that are necessary, with construction tools to dig people out, that sort of thing, backhoes. We have that capacity in every state at the state level, and we certainly have at the national level. And we have the ability with the national agency to coordinate for these disasters. Now, the Federal Emergency Management Agency has come under a lot of criticism for Katrina back in the day when George Bush was president. But the reality is that it's very complicated with the different levels of governance here because it's controlled by different parties, and we have a federal system. Yours is different. It's more of a parliamentary system, although the people pretend it's a federal system. But I don't know what to say. You've hit the nail on the head. A lack of coordination, but it's also a lack of resource, a lack of vision, a lack of anything. I don't understand how, like, for instance, and I'm going to throw shade on Toyota. How in the world, knowing this rain is coming, do you leave hundreds of new vehicles you produced sitting in a floodplain instead of getting your employees or loading them on trucks and driving them to high ground up country? I don't know, say up north of Pietermaritzburg, up towards the Drakensberg, where, something like that. It's the same sort of phenomenon. We see it. It's not just in South Africa. We saw it in New Orleans with Katrina. They had thousands of school buses, and they just left them there. They could have evacuated hundreds of thousands of people. And they're like, well, but we don't have bus drivers. It's a crisis event. You take your employees, you give them an hour course on how to drive a bus, and you give them a test, and you get out there. My point is that we're not seeing this coordination, and if, from your indication, it doesn't appear there is. Is there a disaster response cell somewhere in KZN that's trying to coordinate this? Because you've got teams from Western Cape, the Northern Cape, and Mpumalanga, from Gauteng and the Free State, all descended down there because simply the government wasn't up to the task.
You see, Chris, I always talk about the capable state. For you to have structures and disaster management system in place, you need a capable state. And we're in a situation where we've got a failed state. For example, after the disaster hit, I got hold of a copy of the eThekwini, the Durban disaster management plan, an extremely comprehensive and great disaster management plan. It was adopted in 2016. The problem is absolutely nothing was implemented from that disaster management plan. So you have to ask yourself, why would you go to all that trouble to put together a document of that nature, adopt it, and then you don't implement it? So what I found during the height of the crisis, when I was traveling around the province, as I said to you earlier, there was no central command of what was happening. So people were being shuffled into schools, then left in schools. There was no feeding, there was no sanitation supplied, there was no water supplied. So it was really just a case of crisis management. And if you wanted to deal with an issue, you couldn't go through a central point. You had to either go to the Department of Health or the Department of Human Settlements or eThekwini or through the Premier's office. And it was just absolutely chaos on the ground, with people not knowing who's there coordinating the rescue and the resettlement of those people that had been affected.
Well, Francois, let me just address this, and I'm not trying to endorse or anything like that, but just you've probably seen them. We see time and again, because the state fails at municipal, provincial, and national level for so many things for South Africans, from the simple basic things like once having been the powerhouse of Africa, producing 42% of all electricity consumed in sub-Saharan Africa, to an embarrassment. Eskom can barely manage to maintain 50% of its operating capacity. Right now, almost 35% of its generating capacity at 52,000 megawatts is out of power. And you've gone from a state that may not have served all of its citizens, and that's certainly the truth. We could say that. That's certainly the case. But a state that could serve at least a portion of its citizens that can't serve anybody now. And we see other actors intervene from the private sector who make a difference. In the July events, we saw private individuals who had wealth and resources fly ammunition into the police who didn't have any ammunition or ran out of it within a matter of minutes or hours. And we also saw them help move people around and get other things happening. We've seen private organizations, and the one I'm going to speak of specifically here is Gift of the Givers. They were on the scene very quickly from all accounts. I've seen footage of it. I know the provenance of the videos. It's clear that they're making a difference. Is this something that is at least helping mitigate the disaster? See, let me before you answer, I've termed this the following, because the first response system, climate zealots, it's climate change. Well, it's definitely a biblical storm. Let's accept that, and definitely something unusual here. But the disaster is less so the floods, in my view, and more so the poor or inept or callous non-response from the government. We see Ramaphosa fly in like a conquering hero and go, oh, we're fixing this, and talk to people. He's gone. It's out of his attention. He's back in his mansion now. So are organizations like Gift of the Givers and others who are helping out, are they making a difference? And of course, we got to give a caveat. There are hucksters and shysters out there who try to take advantage of these situations. But Gift of the Givers is one of these legitimate organizations. Are they making a difference mitigating this mess?
Indeed, Chris. There is one thing about KwaZulu-Natal and the people of KwaZulu-Natal. And you're right. We saw it in July, where we had the failed insurrection. And we've seen it now, where the government and local government and provincial government are missing in action. But the people of the province, united in their diversity, lots of non-profit organization, very much like Gift of the Givers, are out there, they're on the ground, and in fact, they're contributing more towards the plight of those affected by the floods than government itself. So, one has to credit and acknowledge those organizations, and in general, the people of KwaZulu-Natal. But Chris, here's another thing I want to raise. Obviously, the rains that we had were astronomical and disastrous. But I need to take you back to 1987, I think it was, when we had Cyclone Demoina, which also caused immense devastation. Our coastline is susceptible to heavy rains, and because of the flatness of the terrain and the geographical landscape, we're susceptible to flooding. We saw that in 2017. We saw that in 2019, where deaths occurred because of flooding. Now, surely we can't have a government that does the same thing over and over and expects a different outcome. We're not learning. I recall the Premier clearly saying in 2017 and 2019, when deaths occurred, we need to get our disaster management up to speed. We need to work on it. Well, a dismal failure. The last 2 weeks have proved that absolutely nothing was done in that field.
No, it is the absolute definition of insanity, isn't it? You keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome without any other inputs. You've got to have different inputs. And as you said, I mean, and it's not just the fact that you're in the Indian Ocean, you're in the path of storms that just because of the nature of the earth and the rotation, they're going to hit there habitually. It's not just that. It's also the nature of the terrain. You know, much of KwaZulu-Natal has no bedrock. It's just soil on top there. We saw that with roads washed out. This chasm, 120 meters deep, this one road washed out. That's insane. And you see there was nothing but it's just soil. It's no wonder that nature reclaims that. Now, here's a concern, and I have grave concerns about the future. We'll get back to the victims and those things, but I'm talking about one of the things that's the lifeblood of the province, and that's tourism. I mean, the images, and this is what, you know, as it was unfolding the first couple of days and people were talking about it and their thing, I said, well, guys, you need to think beyond this. I mean, this is horrible right now, but come the future, beaches, tourists, you're going to have a hard time because you're going to see this stuff washed out to sea and washed right back up onto the shore. Plastic, shards of glass, metal, people, unfortunately, bodies, and all sorts of other rubbish and debris. Or as the Brits like to say, they say detritus, but we say detritus here in America, but detritus, lots of that. And I saw some really horrific images. Now, the good news is a lot of people volunteered, came out to pick this stuff up, and tons of rubbish has been picked up on the beaches of KZN. But this stuff is in the surf. It's going to be washed up and come up on the beaches for a long time. And you're going to actually need to probably contact the folks in Namibia who use those big hoovers to lift the diamonds in the Skeleton Coast there in the Spergebiet, because there are bits of glass and things in your beaches. And I'm not trying to scare tourists away from KZN, but it's going to take a Herculean effort to clean your beaches and make them habitable again for tourists. I mean, no one's talked about that. And I don't mean to, you know, we're going to talk about the other issues, but this is something people need to focus on now. It takes leadership to talk about this because you can't wait until a year from now when no tourists become. You got to talk about it now. It may not be a priority now, but it's got to be something to plan for.
Chris, you know, you're absolutely on the money. One of the challenges we face in this province is our sluggish economy. And a sluggish economy means, you know, jobs aren't being created and people are unemployed. You know, and tourism is one of the jewels in the crown, as it were, for us. Now, you've highlighted some issues about our coastline, which is a tourist destination. And we have a department in the province, Economic Development and Tourism. Now, the MEC of that particular department, MEC being the provincial minister, I have not seen any comment from him as regards to what's going to be happening to try and assist in the cleanup operations. What I have seen, in fact, is the national minister, Lindiwe Sisulu, who has started to make comments and realize that, you know, we've got a lot of work to do to be able to keep that jewel shining in our crown. But again, you know, it's always, to me, the principle of 5 Ps. Proper planning prevents poor performance, and that leads us back to the failed state, which is exactly where we are, and we become reactionary and not proactive when it comes to this type of situation.
Well, I don't mean to add insult to injury, but as a former colonel in the Army and a leader all over the world, I'm always looking to the future. And here's something I'd be concerned about, too. If I was the economic folks at the provincial level in KZN, I would be cozying up to Toyota right now, among others. I mean, Toyota was already talking about divesting from KZN a couple of years ago. You know, Ramaphosa's much heralded FDI drive, which has amounted to very little. It's mostly commitments that were already there and a few small things from software companies that want to settle in Cape Town. But Toyota was already considering, you know, maybe we don't need to be in Pinetown. Maybe this isn't the right place for us to go. And now with this and how much money and losses are going to have and the impact, I mean, and if you have a leader who's involved in economic development, they should be talking to Toyota to make sure they're comfortable and make sure that they want to stay, because, I mean, that would have a devastating impact to lose that production facility.
Absolutely. You know, and as I said, I mean, the area you're talking about where Toyota is the old airport near Durban, that area, which is a very flat area. It's been flooded in the past. And, you know, the question you've got to ask yourself is, what has been put in place to try and mitigate situations like this? You might not be able to stop it, but surely you can develop waterways and systems to actually mitigate any flooding. The problem is, and in our province and in the country where the ANC governs, is they're more interested in getting themselves involved in business than they are in developing an environment that stimulates the economy. Politicians shouldn't be in business. They're there to do legislative work and to create an environment that's conducive to building an economy, a stable economy, supplying the services, and thereby creating jobs. But there are grey areas where politicians think, they should be playing a role in both.
Well, actually, that's good advice. And you know what? I think I'll pass that message to some of the people in the so-called uniparty from the Democrats and Republicans, Washington, D.C., who also seem to be confused about their role, not serving the people, serving themselves with their self-aggrandizement and their appearances on television. Anyway, no, it's a global phenomenon, and we all suffer from it. The number of dedicated public servants who are out there who do it and then go back to life, don't spend their entire existence in office, is really limited. It's kind of sad, and it's really something people pay attention to. I saw that in the Western Cape, the Minister for Education, provincial levels, leaving to take a job in London. People are like, oh, she's been with the party doing things in structures for 20 years, and she's moving back to the private sector. That's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a sign of something healthy. It's every time that a single member of the Democratic Alliance who happens to be black, all the black folks are leaving the DA. Well, they're white folks and colored folks leave the party all the time, and other people come and go. But the emphasis on that's something else. It's really is a bit disturbing what's going on politically in South Africa. So we've talked a little bit about the failed situation here. I mean, I was trying to get some kind of indication, and Twitter, good or bad, Twitter tends to be the breaking news location around the globe, and usually, like for instance, at Senegal on the 6th of October, the first event which I covered, to my knowledge, I was the only independent journalist covering it, and only I think ENCA was there, but no one else went on the first day at Senegal when they first had the trial. Of course, on the 20th of October, 2020, everybody and their brother was covering it, but that event. I lost track where I was going with that, but the point of the story is that the media just doesn't seem to get it. They'll ignore these stories and not pay attention. Is the media having a role helping or hindering the situation, do you think, in KwaZulu right now?
Look, Chris, I think in general, the media in July during the failed insurrection and now have played, I believe, a constructive role.
Okay. Because
very often what they've done is they've gone into areas, they've been the first on the ground, and they've in fact highlighted some of the situations where I have good relationships with certain journalists. They've actually contacted my office and says there's a community there are 5 people still missing. Can you help out? So I would say in the main, a lot of our media have assisted. Obviously, we still have media in our province, which is clearly aligned to the ANC. And, you read some of their reports and you read some of the quotes from the ministers and from the premier, you'd think, there's nothing wrong and everything's back on track. And, 60% of the people have water in eThekwini, living in some other universe.
It's a fantasy
land. Certainly not displaying what we are seeing on the ground.
Well, thank you for that. And, I beat up on mainstream media frequently, I think with great justification. But in this case, I think it is, and that's why I asked the question. I think it's fair to be fair to the media when they're doing their job as the fourth estate, informing the public and also being a watchdog over the government and in the corporate world and others. During the insurrection, failed insurrection in July for the ANC that took place, especially in KZN, there was news coverage out there, but it was slow to get out there. I will give credit, and I did at the time, to an organization that gets a lot of negative press, I think. But in this case, in July, Newsroom Africa, from my perspective, did a bang-up job of getting out in places where things were happening. Particularly, they were in Phoenix and reporting accurately what was happening in Phoenix, which is not what we've seen roll out and what was claimed after the fact. But Newsroom Africa, I think, did a really great job, and we have seen that. But with the media in South Africa, you almost have to have a watchdog independently of the media to make sure that they're on track. But it's good to hear that they're contributing and making a difference, because media play a role in this. People need to know where to go, because clearly there's no public, now an information system. The first thing I saw from the government in KwaZulu-Natal was on Wednesday, they put up a tweet, or they put a tweet up to say something, but they put a tweet out that said, Floodwaters are dangerous. Don't wade into them. Now, this is after 3 days of people trying to win the Darwin Award for, dying in the gene pool, wading across rivers and across roads and cars being washed away. It took them 3 days to even put a simple warning out like that. Now the media can do things like that. They can share things like that. And so the media can play a role, but it's quite disturbing. People, I guess we're complacent as humans, Homo sapiens. We sometimes don't get the danger there. I mean, if water is to the rim on your tires, on your car, you should not attempt to ford any flowing water unless you've got a tank. And even then, you better have good judgment. It's dangerous. And you certainly never should wade across fast flowing water that comes up over your ankles. That's just dangerous. I saw so many videos of these, and I saw cars being washed away, and I'm like, oh my goodness, there's the Darwin Awards. But the government wasn't out warning about people this until 3 or 4 days later.
Chris, a prime example is the bulk of the damages in the city of Durban. Now, if you had some sort of some common sense as a leader, the first thing you would do is put together a disaster team in eThekwini. You would appoint a spokesperson. You would get your executive council team together. You would put up a dashboard of where the biggest disasters were, where you've got to focus your energies, how you're going to do it, and you would communicate this out. Well, the mayor of eThekwini, Nkolisi Kaunda, was missing in action. Now, you'll recall in July, during the insurrection, he was also missing in action, and we attacked him on that. Now, I attacked him again, and I actually spoke to the premier, and I said, where is your mayor? And he said, no, the mayor has flu. And I said, well, I find that pathetic. I mean, people are dying. Hundreds of people are dying. Thousands are homeless. And, you've got no deputy mayor who could perhaps step in. You've got no other structures that could communicate out. And then, lo and behold, a day or two ago, the mayor's office puts out a statement detailing where exactly the mayor was. He was on the ground here. He was there. Well, we never saw him. The media never picked up on him. There was no communication. So I think that gives you an example. As you say, if you've got an effective state, communication would be the first thing. We should have had a dashboard indicating where our problems were, what's going to be happening, how water is going to be delivered, when it's going to be delivered. That was non-existent.
Well, I think you expect too much. I mean, in the age of communication, you're in KwaZulu-Natal, I'm in Pennsylvania, we're talking almost instantaneously. There is a microsecond delay, but the human ear and eye can't pick that up except when YouTube slows down the servers. But in the age of instant communication, I don't see how it's possible to have people spread all over a province and coordinate activities. I mean, no one could possibly use ham radios or the internet or mobile phones or Zoom or exactly. It's I've got to tell you, Mr. Rodgers, I think that you're a little too harsh. I mean, I saw myself a tweet that informed me that just about 7 days after this occurred, that none other than the trustworthy, reliable Zandile Gumeda, Mama Zandile Gumeda, was out and assessing the damage. Last time I checked, she's a highly qualified engineer, and she's a construction expert, and she's also great in disaster management, and I suppose at least being accused of theft. But anyway, Zandile Gumeda was on the scene. You may or may have had flu, but Mama Zandile was out in the streets. I found this to be the height of lunacy. Of course, this lady was just recently in absentia elected leader of a party. Of course, she had to step aside for corruption in KwaZulu-Natal. And then last year, the provincial legislature, the ANC, surreptitiously appointed her to provincial legislator until folks like myself and then the mainstream media in South Africa jumped on board and said, whoa, wait a second. But she's still in the provincial legislature drawing a salary. But you're too harsh. Zandile Gumeda was on the scene. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, Chris, the president keeps talking about a renewal program in the African National Congress. Well, if you're going to re-elect people who are under suspicion of enormous amounts of corruption, in Limpopo, one's been elected who is up for murder.
And accused murder.
What sort of renewal?
It's two charges: accused of murder and attempted murder.
It's the sublime and the ridiculous that we deal with. And as opposition, if we're not on it and we're not shouting at them and exposing it, then where are we going to get to? I mean, you would have seen on social media too. For example, the Premier was accused of having a water truck during the height of the crisis parked outside his house in La Lucia in Durban. He, of course, immediately denied it, and his spin doctors said the video had been digitally remastered or tinkered with. And then 2 days later, he comes out and he says, I'm sorry, I actually misinformed you. The truck was there. It'll never happen again. Really, you got to ask yourself, where is the leadership? Where is the motto? Leaders eat last, and let's put the people first. So this is the type of attitude, the arrogance that we're dealing with the ANC. But let me also tell you, Chris, on a positive note, the days are numbered. 2024, you'll find in this particular province, the ANC will be lucky if they get 40% of the votes. There'll be no outright victor in this province. And the chances of there being a coalition government with the DA being the kingmaker is, in fact, a great possibility.
Well, that's a fair point. And I have to say that I had pretty extensive coverage of the elections. And already after this hysteria over a viral outbreak began a couple years ago after I retired from active service and started broadcasting, I started exhorting and encouraging South Africans to go to the polls because, a 31% turnout is not going to get the results. You need to get out there. And so I endlessly tried to keep people to go. But in the build up to the election, I interviewed 8 different parties and dozens of candidates from these different parties from around the country. The only parties I didn't interview were the ANC and the EFF. Intentionally, I will not interview the EFF. I don't interview race hustlers. So I won't interview them. I suppose if Malema called me up one day, I might give him 5 minutes before I hung up on him. But the ANC, I tried to interview them, but they weren't interested. But I covered a lot of this stuff, and I'll tell you right now, my predictions have been pretty accurate. My predictions for 2024, if South Africa can survive that long, is that in KwaZulu-Natal, the ANC will get 32 to 36% of the vote. That's my expectation. The support for them is absolutely cratered. Now, I've been unkind to the DA because at the national level, I think your party's put a bit of spin on the last election. They're comparing it to the 2019, which is to me not germane. You got to compare it to 2016 municipal election to municipal election. And in KZN, the DA held its own and did pretty well there, and you actually gained a municipality, and you were on the verge of actually having a grand coalition for Durban, eThekwini. In fact, I've interviewed the leader of the Inkatha Freedom Party, which, of course, for those who don't know, it's not Mangosuthu Buthelezi. He still remains in parliament, but he's no longer the leader of the party. His protege is now the leader. And so I interviewed him, and he didn't give me any indication that he was going to do any coalitions with the ANC. In fact, I got quite the opposite sense from that without him coming out and saying it directly. And before the government was formed in Durban, the IFP said that they weren't going to form a coalition with the ANC, and it looked like a grand coalition with your party and others was going to take place there. And then all of a sudden they switched places. I would hope that the IFP, the Inkatha Freedom Party, now has buyer's remorse because they're now painted with the taint and the stain of this inaction and this inept response, and they're just as much to blame, even though they've been in government in running the city for a short period of time. They are just as much to blame as the ANC, and it may be a godsend that coalition didn't come together. I don't know if you want to comment on that or thoughts on that.
Yeah, Chris, the leader now is Velenkosi Hlabisa.
Yep.
That's the leader's name. And obviously, after the municipal elections, we were in negotiation with the IFP. I was actually part of that team. And they, of course, did a 360 and said, no, they're not going to work with us. They'd rather work with the ANC. You'll recall that. And then it just became a bit of a mess. And we said, okay, well, fine, we'll work with you where it suits us on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, in Gauteng, in Johannesburg, we've got a fixed MOU with the IFP, but here in this province, we deal with it on a case-by-case basis, and we'll only support them when it's in fact in the interest of the residents of the province of KwaZulu-Natal. When the disaster broke, we had a debate in the legislature, in the provincial legislature, and the IFP took a very soft approach towards the ANC and said, now's not the time for us to be squabbling. Let's put the interest of the people first. which is great. But the problem is, if you take that approach, you're never going to solve the problem. You've got to be able to expose the weaknesses and the leadership failures to be able to change the status quo. And that's what the IFP seems to fail at. In fact, look, I don't blame you for not wanting to engage with the EFF. We've made it very clear we'll never enter into any coalition with the EFF. But if I look at the provincial parliament here, it's only the EFF and the DA that in fact hold the ANC to account.
Sorry, excuse me. Well, to be fair to the EFF, I will give them that, but it's not because they care about good governance. It's because they just care about getting attention and attention seeking. They oppose the ANC all the time. They have called out ANC failures at the national, provincial, and local level, and they've been doing it increasingly loudly. And for that, that's a public service. But it's not because they actually care about governance. We see this. And let me just relate a story to you that you're probably not familiar with there, Francois. And that is that in Northwest Province, after the elections, there is an independent election analyst named Michael Atkins who looks at South Africa's elections, been doing it for years. And he discovered one of many anomalies. And he saw that a party on the provincial votes, or not provincial, the proportional, the proportional representation votes after the wards were decided, a small new party called the Forum for Democrats should have been awarded a seat on the second round, and they weren't. It was given to the EFF. Now, we're making no claims of malfeasance or bad actors. What happened, you could clearly see that in the returns. Now, this is something only a statistician would understand or find, not you or I or just the average person who's doing politics would find it. So a statistician like Michael saw this and he says, well, someone transposed 19 and put it from the actual vote count of 19 and put 197 for the EFF. So what happened is that the EFF was awarded a seat and this new party didn't get the seat. So that analyst contacted the IEC, which, by the way, didn't release the results until 96 hours after the election. It's supposed to do it, within 24 hours. So they did that and they blew him off. So he contacted the party and said, did you know that you actually won a seat? And they're like, huh? So they got their lawyer, they contacted, the IEC blew them off and ignored them. So long story short, I got involved. I got an attorney in South Africa. We got a civil rights group, and they sent a letter, and suddenly the IEC paid attention when they got a letter from an attorney. And so the IEC looked into it. They said, we made an error. On December 17th, that person should get the seat. Well, today, at 10 o'clock this morning, so a short while ago, he was sworn in as a member of the Provincial Council in Zeerust, the Ramotshera Moala municipality up there in Northwest. But the point of the story here is that the EFF was erroneously given that seat. That person has been sitting on the municipal council for 6 months unjustly. No, I don't know who the person is, male, female, dog, cat, isn't an issue for me. But the EFF had that seat. They were informed that it was erroneous. They have to leave that seat. That person has continued to draw salary. That person continued to sit there and get the perks and vote on issues that they're not supposed to be in office for. So they tried to go to the court and say that the party that responded waited too long. Well, they didn't wait too long. They contacted them as soon as they're aware of it within a couple of 10 days or so of the election. And it was the EFF that didn't respond when they were asked by the IC if you had an objection. So they actually went to the city and the IC and said, you know what? We won't disagree, because it was clear they were losing the case. We won't disagree. That party can have the seat, but we should keep this seat. Let us stay on the council. Excuse me, you didn't win the seat, so just vacate the seat. If you care about democracy and the will of the people, representing the people, then you accept that someone else made an error and it was to your favor briefly, but now it's been returned and you just have to step aside. But no, the EFF wants to hold on to a seat that does not exist because they do not care about representing the people. They care about privilege, power, and access, and that's what it's all about. And that's the bottom line. So it's nice to see the EFF, throw barbs at the ANC and point out their failures, which, by the way, is not rocket science. You sit around for 5 minutes and find this. But I don't take them as a legitimate party. The fact anybody that goes to Parliament wearing prison jumpsuits as their daily dress is really a party that you have a hard time taking seriously. Sorry, I had to go on a little rant there about the EFF.
That's fine. Don't get me started. Because,
we'll be here all day.
I think it's all about principle as well. And it's obviously, it's a party that doesn't have the principle. It's just a populist narrative. And in fact, if you look at their track record, they haven't governed anywhere in our country. They've got no track record of governance. And God help us if they should ever govern anywhere. But
they don't want to govern. They don't want to govern, Francois. They had a mayoralship in the Free State because the ANC threw their vote to them, and they resigned their mayor. They forced their mayor to resign because they wouldn't accept the ANC as part of their coalition.
Yeah. So, perhaps sometime soon they need to get a majority somewhere, and Let them put their money where their mouths is, because it's so easy to be in opposition. It's very easy. It's not that easy to be in governance and to turn things around.
Well, I agree. Let's get back to the floods very quickly here. We've seen the numbers come in, and I don't know what the numbers are now. You said they misspoke or they got it wrong. Then they came back to 17 billion. We're still adding up the tally from what happened last July, the loss there. And the one thing that doesn't fall into this is a lost business opportunity. So for all of the game stores, all of the ShopRites that were torched and looted and burned and destroyed, every day that they're not there doing commerce, that's business opportunity lost. And that adds up into the tens of billions of rand in short order, not to mention the jobs lost. I don't know the true figure, but my initial estimate back then was that this will probably cost KZN anywhere from 150 to 300,000 jobs. And sadly, I predicted that we're going to see over 300 people murdered in this or die in this thing. And it was 350 something. It's pretty sad, but that's all adding up, and it's crazy. But when it comes to the dollar amounts and what's going on here, it's good to see that some people have jumped in to help. But for instance, let me point out, with the billions of rand and hundreds of millions of dollars of losses, the African Union stepped up and offered $150,000. Thank you for that. That's going to go a long way, $150,000. Julius Malema has offered 500,000 rand. I'm not sure where that comes from his personal account, and how does he have 500,000 rand? Or maybe from the party, I don't know. But I'm being obviously a bit sarcastic here. We've seen tepid and virtue signaling donations from others. Now, to be fair, Joe Biden has offered nothing. The guy's not even aware there's a flood. Of course, Joe Biden is famous for having gone to visit Nelson Mandela when he was in prison at Robben Island in Soweto. Robben Island in Soweto? Yeah, so Joe Biden isn't all there, but the United States has done nothing. We've not even recognized this outside. I mean, our embassy's there, but we've not even talked about the floods in South Africa or in Madagascar or in Malawi or Mozambique. It's a bit disheartening. Look, I'm a small government guy. I'm a political conservative, a financial conservative, and I think government has a limited role. But this is certainly a role for government. This is why we form governments. A polity comes together to form governments to address our mutual needs, defense, disaster response, and things like that. If ever a government's needed, this is when it's needed. And this is an epic failure across the board.
Indeed, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I come back to what I said to you earlier. I always like to talk about the capable state versus the failed state. And this is exactly what it is. Now, I must say that I read, but it was this morning or late last night, that the United Nations have also landed in the province. So I suppose one needs to welcome that. Quite what they're bringing to the table, one doesn't know. The one challenge we've got, Chris, in our province is that because of the decline in the economy, the impact of the COVID July, our finances in this province are in a dire situation. I heard that our provincial treasury had asked departments to reprioritize budgets. Well, you can only reprioritize so much, and we've been reprioritizing for, I think, now the last 4 or 5 years. The only way they're going to find money is to stop capital projects and plow that into the repairs, but then puts you on the back foot for future development. So all in all, our province and I think our country financially, this crisis has come at a really, really bad time, at a time where the fiscal challenges facing us in government are really, really tight.
Well, and I think an important thing to mention here, and this is to bring this all back to attention so people notice this is not simply something that affects people in KwaZulu-Natal. KZN, it does obviously affect them and most immediately and most directly, but I think a lot of people lose sight of the fact that the entire Southern African interior relies intensively on KwaZulu-Natal, if for nothing else, for the port of Durban. I mean, most of the goods that come in and out of that region from Botswana, from Zimbabwe, Zambia, even some from Namibia, although you'd think you go the other way, but some things come from Namibia, even this far afield, but certainly Mozambique. All of these things flow down through KwaZulu-Natal, and the port of Durban is absolutely incredible and vital. I have to tell you, one of the most bizarre images I saw, and I saw lots of these images, was containers floating down roads And that's just, I mean, I don't want to say biblical is the nature of these floods, but I was aware that this was going on, I was paying attention, but when I see those, because those things weigh a lot, they're basically turned into rafts floating. And of course, what came next? Looting of those containers. That doesn't surprise me, but that was absolutely insane. My point here, the whole story is, and I kind of got away from it, is that all of Southern Africa should be concerned about what happens in KwaZulu-Natal, not simply the residents of the province and the citizens of South Africa.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. I must say, on a positive note, that it does look as though the port is now open. It's functioning. I don't think it's functioning at full capacity, but it's improved, and hopefully by the end of this week we'll be functioning at the optimal level. So that is the one positive that's been put out there. But we must also remember then that SANRAL, some of the roads that have been destroyed, SANRAL is in charge there, and obviously things are happening quicker than if it had to go through the normal government and provincial government process.
A couple points very quickly. I have not addressed questions in the chat because we have limited time this morning, so my apology for that. Normally I bring the questions in, but there was a question to me earlier I need to address, and that was whether I'm going to cover the Cape Secession rally or something tomorrow. No, I won't. This week is the final week that I'm working with the Army War College, providing consulting services for them. So during the business hours, I'm not available, and that's when that's going to happen in South Africa. So I won't be able to cover that. And there was something else here that that people mentioned the United Nations, and you mentioned it. The United Nations coming. Listen, folks, I've worked with the United Nations, and while parts of the United Nations I have less than a favorable view, when it comes to refugees and disaster response, the United Nations, by and large, does a reasonably credible job at this. They made great impact in helping people in Madagascar when the cyclones hit there recently. So the fact that if the United Nations is going to send some sort of help, that's great. But what I have to say, this is a day late, dollar short, fellas. This was 2.5 weeks ago. 2.5 weeks ago. Now you're responding? You know, it's like people, we're getting search and rescue teams out. Listen to Sile Zikalala say that we're getting search and rescue teams out 9 days after the floods. You're not going to find any survivors 9 days later. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be heartless, but people, if they're trapped in debris, can survive for a few days. But after 72 hours of no water, humans die. You know, you got to have potable water in those 72 hours. And, you know, if you were caught up in a flood and you were washed away and you somehow survived, you're likely to have serious injuries, life-threatening injuries. And 9 days later, you're not going to find survivors from this. They should have had search and rescue teams on the ground 9 minutes after these floods hit, not 9 days. It's very disturbing.
Chris, let me tell you something I experienced myself. You referred to earlier some photographs of an area where a road had washed away.
Yes.
And it was about 60 meters or so, if I remember. Mm-hmm. And you could see the barriers left, but the road had washed away. Now, a journalist had contacted me to say that there was about 16 homes that had been totally flattened there, and that the residents needed help in trying to find 5 missing family members. So I went out there, and the first reaction from that community, they obviously didn't know me. It's not my area. They said, if you're a journalist, we don't want you here. We've had too many. You've taken too many photographs. You've interviewed us, and we don't want food and we don't want blankets. We want to find our family members. That's what we want. No one's been here. Search and rescue haven't been here. The SANDF haven't been here. Anyway, through 2 of my contacts, one was the eThekwini Search and Rescue and the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, we got some teams on the ground there. Now, walking around there, Chris, I can only describe to you the area looked like it had been bombed. It was absolutely flattened. We were walking on rubble of the homes. And walking around there in one particular area, you could smell putrid flesh. Now, I can only describe that smell, and I'm sure most people have smelled what a dead dog or an animal smells like. That's putrefying. It's a god-awful smell. Anyway, we managed to get the dogs and the dog squad and the sniffer dogs onto that site the very same day. But you were right. It was too late. They were unable to retrieve any bodies by that time. We're not sure now where those bodies are, whether they've in fact been washed into the Indian Ocean. And one just puts yourself in those people's shoes, and you realize the devastation and death and the lack of support that this pathetic government and the city of Durban have given to our people.
Well, yeah, that's a great way to sum things up. We're going to wrap up here shortly, but we got a few more minutes. But it's heartbreaking. It really is. It's absolutely heartbreaking to see what's happened and to see what's not happened here. And what's frustrating for me is being so far away and being a leader and not being able to help and engage and get people to do things. It's very frustrating for me to see this lack of leadership, this lack of action that takes place, a lack of planning and preparation. It's really, you mentioned earlier about eThekwini having an amazing plan. They've got a great plan for this. They just didn't follow it and didn't put the resource towards it. It reminds me of Iraq. In 2003, all of the Monday morning quarterbacking for people that do nothing. I was working at the National Security Agency, and I know for a fact that there was actually a reconstruction plan that was about this high in printed paper because I saw it and went through it. The problem is that the U.S. government never followed it. They've designed this brilliant plan for reconstruction of Iraq and for transition to elections and all these things and, turning the power back on. And then they appointed a czar, Bremer, and it just went sideways. And this is a country with all the resources on the planet, and they screw things up, royally. So it's just really, it's heartbreaking to see what's happening there in KwaZulu-Natal. And I don't know how this gets fixed. I mean, it's this is a government that seems more interested. By the way, let me share this with you. You've probably not heard this. I started this campaign this past week. It's time for the ANC to rebrand itself. A lot of their senior leaders are talking about at their conference in the late in the year we're going to have a renewal and the ANC's coming back. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So I'm going to help you with rebranding. It's time to rename it. The ANC, of course, wasn't always called the ANC. They've changed their name from their founding back in 1912, and that's fine. That's their prerogative. But I'm going to encourage them and exhort them to change their name from the African National Congress, or as I prefer to call them, the Angry Naughty Children, to something that I'm calling the hashtag RAIN. And I'm sorry, no, RAIN is probably not the best word for KwaZulu-Natal right now, but RAIN stands for the ANC. It means race hustling, arrogance, ineptitude, and negligence. There you go, RAIN. And that's we're going to rebrand the ANC because that's what they are. I mean, that's the nature of everything they do. It really is sad what's happening there. Before we wrap up here, as far as the SANDF, we saw, over a week ago, the Ramaphosa says we're going to deploy 10,000 SANDF, and I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. And then we hear finally that 400 deployed, but that's just an advanced party. Has the SANDF descended into KZN at all, or even come out of their barracks to have an impact at this stage?
Chris, I certainly haven't seen that sort of number on the ground. I visited the disaster center at Virginia Airport last week, and the sort of numbers you're talking about was certainly not visible. So, I'm not sure where they are. But again, you just look at the SANDF. The last time they were here in July, there was no food. Now I see there's some other scandal about military being given some food that's caused some gastro issues. Again, it just all comes back to the failed state. It's a joke. In this province, we used to have a military base here. We used to have an air detail in this province with Alouettes, Pumas. Now, of course, we've got nothing. We've got the eThekwini Metro Police and the South African police services. That's all we've got, So it's each man to his own, literally, I suppose.
Well, you also used to have, before the ANC played their game of race hustling and falsely attributing this to apartheid, you had something that predated that by centuries, the commando system. And the commandos also were a useful force, a reserve territorial force that could implement and do law enforcement, rule of law, which is something that's needed like now. I mean, and it's no more obvious than when the containers were floating down the sudden rivers that are flowing on the highways there near the port, that you needed law enforcement for rule of law because things can descend into chaos and you can't have that. You see people stealing and looting from these things. And if you have a force like the commandos, they can do coordinated search, they can do search and rescue, they can do lots of things. And here's the irony, and this is, I recall this, when the commando system was being dismantled, 168 regiments of the commandos across the country, because the ANC fraudulently claimed that this was a legacy of apartheid, neglecting the point that the commando systems date back to the Xhosa Wars in the Western Cape, and maybe even before that, when you grab your musket or your rifle and your saddlebag and your biltong and your hardtack and your salty cracks, and you get out there and you defend your home and your farm and your territory. And that's what it came from. But in KwaZulu-Natal, there were two regiments that were all black. and they were pretty much the only job in formal employment that many of those people had. The fact that you don't have something like the commando system, and as you said, you no longer have a military base, you don't have oranges there, you don't have any of these things, that's got to be a bit concerning. KwaZulu-Natal is not a tiny province. It's not a 5-minute jaunt from Gauteng to Durban. Even by jet plane, it takes a lot longer than that. So it's got to be a concern that, and maybe in some respects, maybe you're isolated, not having these resources that you once had.
Absolutely, Chris. And earlier you said, how do we change it? Quite simply, by changing the government. That's the only way. There's no renewal. You can change the bus driver, but the bus is going to remain the same. That's the message I tell everyone.
There you go. Well, with that, I think we should probably wrap up because you're a busy man. There's a lot to do. You've got to get out and take a look and help people out there. So, Francois Rodgers, I want to say kia la boa, bye-bye, donkey. Thank you very much for your time. It's a pleasure to get a chance to meet you and talk to you. I'm sorry it was under these conditions with what's going on, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the residents of KwaZulu-Natal. We hope that between the non-government organizations, the charitable and religious organizations, and private citizens who are picking up rubbish on the beach, and everyone who's contributing in the absence of government response, hopefully that makes a difference. And to those who lost family members and lost their homes, we hope that it gets better. If you can indulge me, there is one question I did want to add, and I didn't ask, and it just came back into my senior moment mind. Can I ask one more question?
Of course.
Okay, sorry. That was a perfect wrap up. It's for you to close, and then I had a senior moment. It went away. The question was this: is that, in the midst of this has been taken as an opportunity by groups like the Economic Freedom Fighters to start their nonsense about expropriation without compensation and about land and spatial distribution and spatial inequities. There's a lot of truth to spatial inequities, the story of that, but these days, those spatial inequities, and this is a good example of it, have far less to do with apartheid and rules back then, and much more to do with the failure to develop the economy and grow the economy since 1994 in a fashion that benefits South Africans. South Africa's economy, by my own estimation, needs to grow an average of 6 to 8% GDP growth year after year for a sustained period of years to catch up and to get people. Plus, you need to fix education, and they've actually destroyed education in South Africa. But the point is that most of what we're seeing here aren't settlements that existed during apartheid. These are people who have moved to places since then, and they haven't been able to get land because many have remained in poverty, because there's no job opportunities, because of a host of things: failed macroeconomic policies by the government at the national level, racist policies which exclude minorities, whites, Indians, and colors from government tenders, from government positions. All of this stuff adds up, poor education. And so this issue about land is a fair question to talk about in South Africa, but this political opportunism to use this to talk about taking farmland, which has no impact on what we're talking about here. We're talking about urban and peri-urban settlement. This needs to be addressed. And some of these people have said they want to rebuild in these dangerous, dodgy locations on creek banks and cliff faces. That can't happen. People need to move to other locations. I will give the ANC credit in the early years of their rule. They frequently would take squatters off of land and move them when they moved to dodgy places and said, you can't live here. But in more recent years, since 2017, when they suddenly latched on expropriation, now they kind of ignore that, except in Joburg, where the Red Ants come out and help the Joburg Metro Police to remove people all the time. But in the Western Cape, when the Democratic Alliance told people who moved into a floodplain they couldn't live there and started removing them, they were called racist. But in fact, they were looking out for the welfare of those people. So going forward, there's got to be some sort of look at this, and I don't know if the DA has a thought about this or if they've got thoughts on this, but certainly at the provincial level, something needs to be done about looking at places where people can find settlement close enough to the urban centers to find jobs. You can't live out in the countryside and commute 2 hours every day. That model doesn't work. But you can't have people living in floodplains and living in places where their health and safety are in danger. Any thoughts or concerns about that? And then we'll wrap up.
Chris, inequality remains a huge problem in our society. And since post-1994, inequality has actually got worse. It hasn't improved. And I think you've put it succinctly what the reasons are. And part of the problem we've had these informal settlements wash away is because of the very reason that you say. Building in, below floodplains and underneath floodlines and all the rest, and in dangerous areas where landslides could become a possibility. And again, we've got to say to the ANC, why are you allowing these developments to take place there? In fact, if one needs to be really succinct and down the line, we need to say to the ANC, you've got blood on your hands. You are the government of the day. You have allowed people to build in areas, and you've put people's lives at risk, and we've seen what happens now. So from our perspective, we will continue to highlight what we believe are the risks when it comes to settlement developments. But at the end of the day, when you're outvoted in a constitutional democracy, you have to shut up and swallow it and go with what the majority says. But as I said to you, 2024, that's where the rainbow is. That's where we're going to see a change in the government in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, and we can start playing a more positive and constructive role in putting together what we believe is a capable and ethical state, like we've done in Cape Town and in the Western Cape and in other metros where we govern.
Well, quite frankly, in Nelson Mandela Bay, in the brief period of time that the party ruled under Athol Trollip, they did a brilliant job there. Unfortunately, they were up constantly nipping at people trying to undo the government there. But, okay, so that's for 2024. And then that's coming. But in the meantime, you know, I'm a huge rugby fan, and this has always been my philosophy. Springboks first, USA always, never the All Blacks, and all but England. So I'll root for anybody but England, and I'll never root for the All Blacks. So with that,
I couldn't agree with you more.
There you go. So with that, now I used to be a Sharks fan, by the way, but that was when Bismarck, Duplessis, and Yanni were there. I'm not much of a fan, although I'm rooting for them now. But I'm a Stormers fan. I got to be honest about that. But listen,
my condolences on that one, Chris.
No, your condolences. We're gonna win the URC. Come on, brother. We're gonna win the URC. But the Sharks are looking tough now again too. But so you know those Northern Hemisphere sides had the excuse, well, it's the high veld, not in the mother city and not in Durban. That's at sea level, brother. You got no excuse anyway. But all right, so the 2024, and the reason I say that, all but the ANC is what I mean, all but the ANC. So vote for someone that's not the ANC, which has been my argument all along. And if you want to vote for Francois' party, the Democratic Alliance, that's your choice. But if you just don't vote for the ANC, so this is the last thing, and that's now. 2024 is a long way off. People are suffering in KZN now. Is there something people should know about KwaZulu-Natal right now, or something they can do to help in the coming days if there's something they want to do? Because we know we've seen people, also seen video now of government officials purportedly taking donations and stealing them, which we saw during the pandemic. We saw a lot of ANC government officials stealing stuff, threatening people who are donating to the poor, who couldn't feed themselves. And we're seeing some of that now. So we don't want people to give the resources to dodgy organizations, but is there something people can do to help out now in some way? And then we're going to say farewell. So I'll give you a chance to share that.
Chris, simply put, I think if there are people out there who would like to support the disaster relief program, we would certainly welcome that. I would not pay any money towards any government program that deals with disaster relief. We've seen in this province, we saw it during the COVID pandemic. We saw the amount of corruption, looting, the 20 million that was stolen on blankets. So giving money to government, the rich are going to get richer. You've mentioned organizations like Gift of the Givers. I can assure you that any money contributed to that non-profit organization, every single penny that you contribute will be used wisely. What we will do as opposition in the province, because we're now getting money from National Treasury, there's R1 billion coming to us, we will watch like hawks as to how that money is going to be spent, who's going to spend it, because let me tell you, the hyenas and the vultures are already circling to try and get their grubby paws on that money.
Well, thank you very much. Francois Rodgers, the leader of the Democratic Alliance in KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa, dealing with yet another disaster, which has been exacerbated by human stupidity, human failure. We saw it in July last year. We're seeing it again this year in April of 2022. Sad events, a province that's buffeted by some big challenges. Sir, thank you so much for your time. We'll reach back out to you a little bit down the road and see where things are at and try to get an update. But best of luck to you and to the residents of KwaZulu-Natal.
I'll greet you in Xhosa and I'll say, Diabulela, Chris, usala kahle nje.
That's beautiful, and I don't understand it, but I'm sure it was a wonderful.
I said thank you very much, Chris, and stay well.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I speak 6 languages, and that's not one of them. All right, with that, I'll let you drop off. Ladies and gentlemen, that was
Sure.
Francois Rodgers from the Democratic Alliance. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Be sure to smash the like button, share links to this video so people can get an update on what's actually happening. It wasn't just a complaint session. We actually talked about what's happening, updates in the province, and things that are being done, things that can be done. Thank you all so much. God bless. And yes, gift to the givers, God's angels out there doing a wonderful job. I'm eventually going to try to get around and interview the founder of that. I keep talking about that, but I'm going to make a serious effort of it. They do wonderful things in South Africa and around the world, helping people in need. Be sure to smash the like button, folks. We're just short of the number we're looking for there. And thank you so much. I'll be back later today at an unusual time because I'll be briefing at my normal time. So I'll have a news update later today. I'll catch you guys for that. Thank you so much. And everyone take care. It's a pleasure having you on the program and joining us. And thank you for the comments. I apologize. I couldn't get to all the chat today. Very busy, and we had important things to get to here. So you can come back and ask the questions later on when I'm doing my news program. Take care, folks. God bless. And thank you once again to the Democratic Alliance and to Francois Rodgers from KZN.